If you follow cricket in India, then you've heard of John Gloster. Not only did he make sure that your favorite players are on the field and able to play the game, he's also been a significant thought leader in the physical fitness, physiotherapy, and overall sports space, not just in India, but actually in the world. John served as the physiotherapist for the Indian national team from 2004 to 2008. He also worked with the Bangladesh national team, the Surrey County cricket team, and currently he's the head of medical and sports sciences with the Rajasthan Royals. He's also the director of sports science with GoSports Foundation India, and he serves as an advisor and a consultant to a number of corporates. John, thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, John, let me start with where we've come since you've been changing things in India over the last 20 years. So, when you worked in India in 2005, the physical fitness and the injury management space was completely different than what it is today. You also worked with a lot of legends when you came into the team. You had Tendulkar, Saurav Ganguly, Rahul Dravid, but also you saw when young players at the time like MS Dhoni came into the squad. So, what was the physical fitness and injury management in the Indian team locker room in 2005 versus what you see today with young players with the Rajasthan Royals? And how has it evolved?
Yeah, well, first of all, you're making me sound old by using some of those dates you've just given, but it's been an incredible experience. And you touched on it there when you said the influx of some of this younger generation. So the legends were there when I first came, many of them, but they were probably of the older school in terms of fitness and their understanding of the value of fitness. But knocking on that door at that time were the MS Dhonis, the Rohit Sharmas, the Mohammad Kaifs, and they were the ones that we started to work with because we knew that they would be easier for us to work with in terms of uplifting the overall general fitness of the team. When I first came to India, one of my sort of objectives was to really focus on changing the face and the understanding or the value of what fitness brings to the sport of cricket. We'd never really sort of put cricket and fitness together, and it was never really thought of as a sport where fitness was at the fore. But having come from Australia myself, where fitness is embedded into us from a very young age, we needed to look at if we want to improve consistency and consistency of results, then we would have to address the fitness side. And that's where John Wright, first of all, was a big influence for me, then Greg Chappell, was because they also believed that without fitness, you will never be a consistently good team, no matter what the sport is.
Right.
Any sport. And I always tell the story of Indian hockey and the undoing of Indian hockey. Indian hockey dominated the world for 50 years, across Olympics, World Championships, World Cups, everything, because it was a highly technical sport played on grass, where speed was not a component. In the 80s, it shifted to AstroTurf,
Right.
which is a speed-based game. And Indian hockey fell off the map because the teams that were fitter suddenly took over. Not because they were better skill-wise. The most skilled, and still to this day, the most skilled technicians of most sports like cricket, hockey, are actually from the subcontinent. But they lack the fitness. And until they could bring up the fitness, they were always going to be behind the 8 ball. So my job really was to try and lift that. But because that new breed was starting to come through, we were better able to communicate and change their ways than we were perhaps with the older generation, who relied mostly on skill alone. And as we started playing more and more different formats, we realized that fitness was going to be the clear differentiating factor. And it's not only about performance, it's also about the injury prevention side of it as well. So luckily for me, particularly when MS took over as captain, was that he was a naturally fit athlete who then uplifted most of those young guys around him as well. So it was a lot easier towards the back end of my tenure with the Indian team. And then that obviously went straight into IPL, where everybody was on display. Fitness was on display because of the other nationalities that were involved in that tournament at the start. And everybody then appreciated that without fitness and without skill in those domains, then the technical would never be able to flourish.
Right, right. So sticking on this subject, and you talked about India, which is very interesting, the hockey analogy that you used there and the hockey example. You read a lot about athletes in specific countries like Korea. The archers of Korea are the best in the world. And there's a lot of studies that go into which muscles are required specifically and focusing and concentrating on those without letting other muscles interfere. Obviously, in sports, and this is more general, not cricket related, but in sports, what a basketball player requires is very different from, let's say, the mobility of a golfer or what a cricketer requires. So then that's the same for nutrition and their overall training and mental focus, etc. So where is India in terms of the knowledge and infrastructure to develop elite athletes physically so that the next generation of Indian athletes is at par with the world, at least in terms of the physical aspect of it?
That's an interesting point. There's infrastructure and there's knowledge infrastructure, as you said. And I think when we look at infrastructure in India now in terms of bricks and mortar of facilities, we're doing really well. There's been some fantastic sort of advances in that space, particularly with us hosting large events now.
Yeah.
I think we've got a lot of the infrastructure piece covered. It then comes down to the knowledge infrastructure, and that's the resources, that's the people, because they are the game changers. And I think you rightly said, in the key areas, or the areas that I think are really key for performance is nutrition and sports nutrition, and the understanding of that and the value and the role that plays in an athlete's journey. Strength and conditioning is probably the next biggest thing for me. I think we've understood the value of sports physiotherapy because of perhaps people like myself and the Andrew Lepus of the world and Patrick Farhards who've come here and demonstrated value around that. But if we want to take our athletes to the next level across all sport, we need to start appreciating the other verticals that exist in a strong sporting ecosystem, and that's nutrition, S&C, and sports psychology. They're the next big three that we've got to embrace and encourage and uplift internally in terms of knowledge capability. The nutrition piece is one that I'm extremely passionate about because I do see it as a differentiator. And particularly when we focus now more on recovery and getting the best out of our athletes through recovery, then nutrition has to underpin that. So nutrition underpins what I call the three key pillars of performance. One is the preparation phase. The next is the actual performance phase itself, which is the match day. And then the recovery piece, which is the final one. And nutrition underpins every single one of those. And then those good nutritional practices, they then take on into life beyond their sporting careers.
Yeah.
The next one for me is the S&C, as I said. And I often pose this question: if you go into the modern day sporting room,
And just sorry, but just for everyone, S&C, strength and conditioning.
strength and conditioning, yeah. And I always say, ask the question when you look around a modern day sporting room and say, who's the most important person in this room? And most people say the coach, because they're driving the ship, they're directing traffic, they've got the plans, the strategy, etc. But actually, that coach is only as good as the team that's preparing those athletes. They can have particularly in a sport like football, for example, they can have the best plans in the world and the best strategy in the world. But if the players aren't fit enough or even on the park for that strategy to be put into effect, then he's probably the worst coach in the world because they're not going to get the results.
Yeah.
So we need to go back and look at who is developing our players, who's managing our players, and who's looking after the strength, the conditioning, the nutrition, and the overall general well-being of the playing cohort. Because if it's not up to scratch, then results will never occur. So that's where we're really focusing on now, is going back and trying to uplift our internal resources in those, what I call those four key pillars. And I think, and this is beyond cricket, I think we've demonstrated through cricket, and that's been the beauty of the IPL, is it's brought a lot of those skill sets into India for everybody to see their value.
Yeah.
What we need to do now is embrace that in other sports, particularly our Olympic sports, and start appreciating the value that they will play in developing our athletes in other sports outside of cricket.
Yeah.
And that's partly why I get asked all the time, John, why are you still here 21 years later? Well, part of it is because I see opportunity, and I see if we do build the right ecosystems of support around our athletes, we don't lack the talent. We lack the nurturing of that talent through them being able to access these key critical verticals that underpin performance.
Are you seeing that now at starting with young athletes? Because, I mean, doing it when you're 28, 29 is fine, and it should be done. But are you seeing that? And so that it becomes part of a young athlete's...
Yeah.
And nutrition is not for 2 months of the IPL.
No.
It's for the entire year.
And that's why we're trying to sort of drill deeper down into our sporting pyramid and start accessing children at a much younger age so we can have a greater effect. So that the impact of good nutritional practices, good strength and conditioning training, even the early intervention of sports psychology to our athletes.
Yeah.
If we can start that earlier, then obviously their journey is going to be far more successful.
Yeah.
One of the, I find quite a shocking statistic is that in Indian sport, we lose about 82% of our athlete cohort, our talented competing athlete cohort between the ages of 15 and 18. And part of it is because of the lack of these support resources around our athletes, particularly our female athletes. And one of the things we've identified is what we call these threatening environments, particularly for our female athletes. And how do we de-threaten the ecosystem? Because if you look at a classic sporting support ecosystem in India, it's very male-dominated across all of those verticals that I just mentioned. Maybe not so much in nutrition, but the other three is still very male-dominated.
Yes.
And that is quite threatening for our female athlete cohort. So how do we try and uplift, upskill, and resource our female experts and deploy them into the ecosystem so that the majority of our female athletes are then well supported and stay in the system for a lot longer. So there are a number of things that we need to address. I think we're starting to identify now where these holes are or where the problems are in Indian sport. And most of it comes back to people and resources for support.
So not the physical infrastructure as much as the HR infrastructure that still needs that upgrade.
Yeah, I think as you put it, knowledge infrastructure is a beautiful way of putting it. Actually.
Yeah.
And I think if we can get that right,
yeah,
then I think we've got the talent. We certainly have got the talent.
Yeah.
The next phase will be to expose that talent more to international competitions.
I was just going to say competition,
Yeah, that's going to be the next big thing. And we're internally, through one of the foundations I'm involved with, that is something we've really focused on since Paris. Because we did sort of highlight that after Paris, was that so many of our athletes got to sort of not quite podiums, but fourth places, fifth places, into finals, into quarterfinals, but never quite got there. And in many of those sports, they were what we call the non-physical sports. So where things like archery, shooting. I'm not saying they're not physical, but I'm just saying where the physical component was probably not the differentiator.
Yeah.
So then we started to look at sort of the shoulders up and saying, well, maybe we need to address the mental conditioning side of these athletes slightly more. And not just the athlete, but also their support ecosystem, particularly their coaches. So it's one thing to expose your athlete to different, not just training environments, but competition environments. But you need to consider the coach in that equation as well. Because if they're not exposed when they are to these high performance, high pressure environments, they may make poor decisions as well. So we've got to look at the athlete as part, even an individual athlete, we say they're part of a team because the coach has to be considered as part of that athlete's team, and we need to upskill, uplift our coaches as well.
Yeah, I think that's the longer term solution than just working with.
Yeah, it has to be
individual athletes.
Yeah, it has to be for sure.
Yeah, talking a little bit about injury management, I think that seems to be one of your favorite subjects, and so I
can't escape it.
So I'm gonna ask you, which is quite a hot topic, and it's been very hot topic in football recently. But it's a conversation in cricket that never ends, especially with more T20 competitions coming in. Is there too much cricket and football being played?
What do we do? We've got a new best friend, I think, that we've got to get smarter with as technology. I think we now have access to some very, very good technologies that are going to help us with answering that question.
Okay.
And obviously we're using the IPL as a test bed for a lot of this. When you look at the tournament like the IPL, where so much money is spent on individuals to perform for a short period of time, then my job then is to manage that asset as effectively as I can, because we need to look at them as assets that have to perform over a certain period of time. And how do I, as an asset manager, make better decisions? And I can make better decisions if I know more about that athlete, and I can do that through some really smart technologies that are available to us. So we need to be open to using technology better, understanding it better, using data better, getting better people in to interpret that for us, and then obviously have strategies around how we use that data in order to benefit that athlete or that team. So GPS is the first thing that comes to mind, because workload management is the thing that we need to consider above everything when we're looking at all format players, particularly across all three formats. So better managing workload. And workload is not just about how far they run, it's about various forces that the body goes through, particularly with our fast bowlers. And we can track all that on some of these new devices, which are really impressive. And then we come up with certain data sets that allow us to be better able to manage their loads and therefore at least prevent certain injuries better. I do often tell this story about when we first came into using GPS, which was back in the early 2000s. And when we first started to get the data sets back, we thought the machines and the units were actually faulty. Because I was seeing numbers like in a one-day international, our fast bowlers were doing about 15 to 16 kilometres of total distance covered. Now, we always considered cricketers who just stood around all day and didn't really do a lot, and they just seemed to be walking from A to B and, didn't really raise a sweat. And then in 4-day cricket and test cricket, we're seeing up around between 22 and 25 kilometres a day in total distance covered. And then when the T20 format came around, some of our guys were up around 11 kilometres.
It's a lot for T20.
Totally in a T20 match.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
So what that did was, first of all, once we verified the data, was that we needed to train these cricketers like athletes, because they are athletes. When you look at those numbers, we weren't training them appropriately. And so one of the ways to then mitigate injury is to then train as per a match scenario or match performance. And so this gave us great insight about what their match day efforts were like.
Requirement would be, yeah.
Which meant that therefore determined what their training efforts had to look like as well in order for them to be match fit and match prepared. So that was fantastic. And then, with the things like ultra-human rings and Aura rings and Whoops and all these other wearable technologies, has given us another layer of insight into the physiology side of the player, which has been fascinating. And I've always been a big one for looking at bloods and making nutritional sort of plans and advice around insight, particularly bloods. But when we got the technologies that we wear, as I said, that started to help us fully understand the space of recovery. Because if you don't recover well, then you don't prepare well, which means then you don't perform well.
Yeah.
So until we get the recovery piece right, we're always going to be struggling. And that's where we weren't great. And that's where looking at other sports has really helped us. So we've started to look, personally I've started to look at AFL, Australian rules football, rugby, football, because they do it really well. Okay, and we would be foolish not to look at established sports in that space, in the sports science space, in the sports medicine space, and learn from that as well.
Yeah.
And so for recovery insights like sleep, and these wearables give us great data on sleep. And sleep underpins, as I said,
like
nutrition
nutrition
before.
And sleep, yeah.
Sleep is the next biggest baby, probably even bigger. And I remember the great Shane Warne saying to me when he first turned up to the IPL in 2008, saying, "John, sleep is the best medicine." And I just thought it's because he just wants to sleep in. But he is dead right.
Yeah.
If you don't sleep right, you don't recover right, you don't perform right, and you don't make the right decisions because you're cognitively impaired. So that has been a big, big focus for us, is really drilling down on sleep practices, travel logistics. You won't believe how much travel impacts on recovery, particularly in a tournament like the IPL, where you play till 2, you're back into the hotel at 1:32 in the morning, You may have an early flight the next day, which means there's no sleep recovery. That impacts you playing the day after. So thanks to our logistics team and our finance team at the Rajasthan Royals particularly, who've worked very closely with the performance team to say, well, if we want to get performance right, we need to get recovery right. So things like even chartering aircraft, so that we don't take off first thing in the morning on a commercial flight. We actually allow the players to get their full sleep period in, and we travel after lunch. So that's where the game's changed. And that's changed only on the back of insights that we're getting from various wearable technologies. But it's certainly made my job a lot easier. And it also has made my job of having the conversation with the athlete a lot easier about why we do what we do. Why do I train you the way I train you? Why do I advise you about sleep and nutrition? Because these are the markers, and I can show them objective data to demonstrate the value for them.
So this actually leads me to my question about at the Rajasthan Royals, because you touched on a very important point with the IPL. The turnaround time is 48 to 72 hours with matches. Matches getting over late. The number of matches is increasing.
And muscle recovery time is 56 hours. So it takes, after full exertion like an IPL match, muscle recovery in terms of strength, power, and flexibility is 56 hours. Now, I don't have 56 hours. Sometimes I've got 48
hours. Yeah.
How do I compress my 56 hours into 48 hours or sometimes shorter? That's a skill that we've had to develop. And as I said, thanks to having great relationships with our logistics team, has allowed us to do that better. What equipments do we need? What wearables do we need? What travel schedules do we need? What hotels do we need? What nutrition do we need? How do we offset that with anti-inflammatory, antioxidant nutritional practices? What supplements do you guys need? This is the level that we need to go to now, because as I said, I've got 48 hours.
Yeah.
And I got to squeeze 56 hours into that 48.
Wow, that's a lot of work.
But you also need compliance, and that's one of the most difficult things with athletes, particularly young athletes, as you know.
Yeah.
Is getting them on board as well. So compliance, a lot of these strategies fail if you don't have compliance.
Yeah.
But the best way to demonstrate compliance is to demonstrate value for that individual and their own outcomes.
Yeah.
Which you can do if you have data.
You can actually just show it to them.
Exactly.
This is the reality of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I hear you. So I want to talk to you a little bit about your experience with the Indian cricket team, and would love to, because we just see on-field performance. We don't know actually what's going on behind the scenes in the player's mind, in the player's mind, in the player's body. So can you share a story of an Indian player or any player that was actually going through a lot of physical stress and injury and came out and played or had an incredible performance on the field?
Am I allowed to? Yes, of course I can. Look, first of all, it's part of the modern game to be sore. Particularly if you're a fast bowler and you're playing all three formats. You're going to be sore. Niggles, sore. I mean, that's part of the modern game. I remember once, it was a 1990, I think it was a 98 test tour to England with the Australian team. I remember Jason Gillespie saying to me once, he said, John, I asked him one morning if he was sore, or I don't know. I said, are you feeling all right? And he said, John, if a fast bowler ever tells you that he's not in pain and he doesn't need a Voltaren to get out of bed in the morning, he said he's either lying to you or he's not working hard enough. So I've never forgotten that. But yeah, I've had players who we've had to take calls on. Every time we have to take a call. My first call is what is in the best interest of the player, because player safety and protection is number one. That's my job, is to protect that individual. But I remember we had a player in the 2007 Test series to Australia, and he was a young fast bowler, Ishant Sharma, he won't mind me saying his name, who ended up playing over 100 Test matches for India, and deservedly so. But that was his breakout series. And he went into one of those games, I think it might have been the Perth game, where he actually did phenomenally well. But he had a broken toe. He had a broken toe on his landing foot. And he insisted on playing, but we had to inject him for every game into his toe. Before every session, he had to take a painkilling injection, a numbing injection into his toe, because he wanted to play, and from that day on, I knew that this boy was he may not have been the most talented fast bowler in the world, but he had that one special ingredient that I knew he was going to play 100 Test matches. He had that inner resolve that a lot of them with far more talent didn't have. And the fact that he could have just pulled the pin and said, no, my toe's sore and I can't play. And I don't know if you've ever seen anybody getting a intra-articular injection into a toe. It is absolute agony until the anaesthetic kicks in. And to see this boy screaming, but then going out and performing the way he did in Australia on that tour, which was a breakout tour for him, was, I've always had the highest respect for him as a person since that day. So, and they're mostly fast bowler stories. Sean Tate, arguably the fastest bowler of all time, and one of the nicest guys of all time as well. Sean, who played for us for many years, but I've known he's an Adelaide boy from where I'm from. And Sean, towards the back end of his career, because of his elbow condition, he used to take, same thing, an injection into his elbow before every game. So these are the lengths these guys go to make sure that they're up and ready to perform. So, as I said, they're all going to have something, but you've got to make a decision about what's safe, what's not safe. Can I let you go out and perform? Because the majority of them will want to. And sometimes you have to make the hard call that, no, I don't think it is in the best interest for you and therefore the team. But that's what we're there for. We need to make those calls sometimes. But yeah, there's been some tough guys that play. MS was tough. A lot of these guys, particularly wicket keepers as well, with their hands.
Right.
Quinton de Kock, I've seen play with, broken fingers, and, so there are elements of the game that you just got to say, well, if I let you go out, are you going to perform, number one, for yourself? Are you therefore going to perform for the team? But you're going to come out the other side of this not worse off.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, because this is the sides of athletes that we don't know.
Yeah.
So it's quite
because when they all jog onto the field, you think, oh wow, they all look great, they look fantastic. But every time they jog onto the field, I'm like, okay, that guy, yes, okay, that guy's fine, and you then start watching individuals because you know them all inside out.
Yeah.
You know who's limping, who's not limping. Like you look at Jofra Archer, and Jofra Archer has a natural sort of limp anyway, and so you think, okay, that's natural for Jofra, but when it gets beyond that, is that normal? Is that not normal? So they've all got these little idiosyncrasies about them that because you know them inside out, literally.
Yeah.
And when they start deviating from that, it's a red flag for me, but others probably won't pick that up because they don't know. They just don't know them. Yeah.
We just shout saying, "What the hell is he doing?
What's he doing? Get him off!"
Yeah, exactly.
But we spend so much time building these relationships. Like I said before, we use data from wearables to get an insight into players. But the greater insights of that player are the emotional insights that you take from them. And I think being in the medical side and the physio side and sports science side of that athlete's journey, we understand them and know them a lot better than most because they spend a lot of time on our medical couches.
Yeah.
And that's where you understand a lot about players. But one of the things we do, and we do this very well at Rajasthan, is as soon as they come into our fold from an auction or a trade, then we start the relationship build from day one. So that when you get to the IPL 2 or 3 months later, you do know those individuals. So you don't spend the first part of the tournament trying to understand them.
Yeah.
Because then you might miss something.
Got it.
You may miss something. So what are the best relationship builders that you can have with those individuals? One is care and demonstrating care and trust. And also spending time. So literally flying to them. And even if it's just flying to them and having a coffee and a sit down and a chat, it's amazing what you unpack that's different to a phone or a message or a Skype call or whatever. Face to face, hands on.
You can't beat it.
You cannot beat it.
Got it. It's interesting. I want to talk a little bit about we want to take a pause, right, for the question. Sorry. You talked a little bit about compliance of the younger athletes, which is challenging because they're suddenly in the limelight. Rajasthan obviously got one of the superstars with Vaibhav Suryavanshi.
Yeah.
What advice do you give him, and what advice would you give other younger athletes and their parents so to make sure that they have a long, injury-free as much as they can career?
Yeah, that's a very unique case. and needs managing very differently. Sometimes we forget, because they are so talented and so skilled and are performing within an adult environment so successfully, that we often forget they're kids. We often forget he's a 14-year-old boy at the end of the day. And so the key messaging around him is to let him be a 14-year-old boy and underpin him with some basics. And those basics are what I talked about: nutrition, recovery, the basics that we would anyway be implementing at that age for most of our athletes. But with a slightly different lens, because of who he is and where he is and the other pressures that he's under. Supporting him emotionally is really important, and we have some fantastic people within our team to do that. Aaron Walsh, who's our head of mental performance, culture and environment, is amazing with some of these younger athletes. Supporting him with sort of an environment where he can still be a child within an adult environment, and still keeping fun at the center of everything, because kids want to have fun.
Yeah.
And his fun is obviously different to most kids, 14-year-olds' fun. But how do we create a fun environment that is not pressure-filled for that boy? And yeah, so that's where our support team, we sit often on these conversations and map out certain strategies for players like that, giving him time away, letting him do things that others perhaps won't be doing. And that could be on the entertainment front, could be on the nutritional front, and letting him be a child. Because part of who he is and part of the success that he's had is because he has no fear.
Yes.
He hasn't had pressure, and he's still having fun. So how do we ensure that environment stays, and we culture that for him as he then journeys the rest of the sort of the physical journey, the emotional journey, and his sporting journey at the same time. But yeah, it's a very unique case, and it's one that I think we should document a little closer, because I don't think he'll be the last one coming through now.
Yeah.
India has an enormous bed of talent. I'm not saying they're all as talented as Vaibhav Suravanshi, but there are kids I've seen of similar talent in a similar age bracket that I'm sure are going to come into the professional fold very soon. And we do need specific strategies around these kids to make sure that they're not burnt out, that they're not overexposed. And this is where our media team needs to be really sharp and really switched on, and which they are, because social media is what elevates most people from nothing to everything.
Yeah.
And how we manage these individuals and their journeys and the stories that we tell around them is really, really important, because that's who the greater audience sees. We want them to see who he is, which is a 14-year-old boy with enormous talent, but not overexpose him beyond that, and not set any greater expectations around that, because expectation can sometimes kill off skill. And we need to temper that, and we have a responsibility as a franchise across all our verticals, particularly our media, content, digital platforms, because that's where so much of our audience is, and so much of where the sort of energy of the franchise comes through that. So, and that's there because of the players. So how we portray that individual to the audience is something that we need to be very careful of.
Yeah. I was actually speaking to some people who work with different IPL teams and said every year, especially for young players, they should have a training session on social media.
Which we do.
How to handle it, for the trolling. And
I think the BCCI has also taken that initiative as well at the NCA, and they're skilling them across all of these, because you think about, they're having to front media, they're having to speak on some sensitive topics sometimes, which they need to be which they need to be educated on. We try and go into every year with a theme, some sort of theme that we're passionate about as a franchise. We try and sort of bring that into a lot of the conversations that we have in the sort of social media space, in the general media space. I think that's a really good strategy as well. So then the players always got something to go back to that they can have a conversation about, that they're comfortable with. And it's all about making them comfortable in that domain, because it's a domain that's going to dominate going forward. And And when you look at eyeballs on TV and social media eyeballs, that's revenue at the end of the day, and we can't escape that. But how do we manage that, and the individuals within that is a big responsibility, because you can cripple a talent off the field by poorly managing them in that space.
Yes.
As quickly as you can cripple them on the field by poor performance.
Yeah. Now this next question is a bit of a personal question, but I think it'll apply to everyone who's watching this, or a lot of people who are watching this. One of the biggest sports today is paddle and pickle. They're really picking up. Every physiotherapist I speak to say, I love the two sports because my business is booming because of paddle and pickle. So what should paddle and pickle players do? And a lot of people are playing it who haven't played sports before, but what should paddle and pickle players do to make sure that they remain injury free?
Well, first of all, I think it's fantastic that people are actually going out and being physical, particularly the age bracket that's embraced it most, which is that sort of 40-plus age bracket.
Yeah.
Obviously, as you get older, the risk goes up when you take up a new challenge, and you come into it relatively underprepared, because it's quite a demanding sport. But I'm never going to say no to anybody who wants to take up a form of physical activity, no matter what age they are. So the key thing is the advice about how do you prepare adequately for that, so that experience is a pleasant one, so that you don't get injured. It's not fun being injured. It's not fun rolling your ankle. It's not fun getting a tennis elbow. It's not fun, and it's not fun being away from your sport. Same approach that we have with our athletes is, how do I better protect that individual so that they can stay enjoying their sport for the longest period of time? The word that you hear everybody talk about now is longevity, longevity this, longevity that. Well, again, one of my jobs is to improve the sporting longevity of not just our athletes, but the general population, with good, sound, solid advice so they can enjoy their sport for the longest period of time, injury-free and performing at their best. So I think, yes, my physio colleagues are doing very well out of it commercially, which is great and good on them. But there's also another big opportunity here to educate on actually how do we prepare for new sporting challenges, and how do we do that better than anyone. And as I said before, this is where our two other colleagues come into the conversation, our strength and conditioning coaches and our nutritionists. Because without them, you are going to be coming into a sport like paddle or pickle underprepared. So how do you embrace the services of not just your physio, but actually your S&C coach and your nutritionist? Because they will give you advice that is probably going to help you in your sport to remain injury-free and performing at your best, better than anybody, I would say. So I see this as a great opportunity to educate the public. And the other thing is then kids start seeing their parents being active and playing sport.
Yes.
And for me, that is the biggest win. There's an old saying, what has been seen cannot be unseen. Now, if they're seeing their parents getting out and having a real go of it and having fun and socially engaged, using it as a social environment as well as a physical environment, then that's brilliant for our kids, because hopefully they're going to do the same thing. And you asked me earlier about the difference between 2004 and 2025. Well, it's probably in this area, in the general population embracing physical activity and movement more than ever. I can remember, living in South Bombay in the mid 2000s, and you hardly saw anybody on Marine Drive, particularly pre-marathon. Now it's everybody is running and jogging and doing this. So it's fantastic. We need to find a way, as I said, to better educate to be prepared for that, and I think there's a huge opportunity there on a number of fronts. So things like equipment, getting the right equipment, the right shoes, the right advice, the right wearables. So there's a huge commercial space here as well that can be leveraged, and I think India is sort of on the cusp of particularly in the technology space, consumer technologies for our what we call our weekend warriors, the ones that go out and I think there's a big opportunity there as well. But for my physio colleagues, my strength and conditioning friends, and my nutritionist friends, then they're probably going to be the busiest. But I think that's a really good thing.
I'm going to do a quick rapid fire segment to wind up. John,
Uh-oh.
this is something that I've wondered, I think, for more than a decade. What is the magic spray that you guys use on cricketers on the field? What is that?
Well, it used to be a sponge once upon a time. If you go back and look at the old footage from the 70s, it used to be a cold sponge in a bucket of water. It's just a freeze spray, and really it's just a numbing spray.
Okay.
And I think a lot of it's more placebo than impact. But if you've ever sprayed that spray on yourself, actually, it is reasonably effective. So for those superficial blows where it's like a bit of what we call a stinger, and it's superficial, then it's quite effective. But as I said, part of my job is to go out there and ascertain the degree of injury and is the spray enough, or actually there's something more going on here and we've got to really look at this closer. So that's where skill and experience comes into it, and making the right decision at the moment. But the good old spray is enough to get most people back on the park.
Watched it happen too many times now. The most naturally fit athlete you've ever seen or worked with?
Australian rules football. A number of Australian rules footballers I've worked with in Australia. I think the ultimate sports person for me in the modern sport, the sports that I've been involved in, I've been involved in a lot of sports from Olympics right through, but the Australian rules footballers are probably the best conditioned athletes I have ever worked with.
Wow.
And anybody that's watched Australian rules football knows that they've got to not just have speed, they've got to have endurance, they've got to have strength, they've got to have durability, they've got to have mobility, and you can't escape. There's zero escape. In the cricket world, we've seen some fantastic athletes, and more now, and not just from the southern hemisphere either anymore.
Yeah.
You know, as I said before, MS Dhoni was one of the guys that naturally took, because he was a natural athlete and naturally quick, and speed underpins the modern game. So MS demonstrated that the faster you were, the better you were going to be. So MS for me stood out in the early days. Pretty well everybody that comes across our radar now is a good athlete. Another guy who I talked about before who was a phenomenal athlete despite his size was Sean Tate. And the fastest from sort of 30 metres to about 80 metres that I've ever worked with was Sean Tate. Again, he was an Australian rules footballer before he was a cricketer.
Okay.
So yeah, there's some amazing athletes out there, but they'd be the ones that spring to mind.
Got it. What's your view on ice baths?
Yeah, CWI, we call it, cold water immersions, can play a very big role. Some people find, again, we talked about longevity earlier. There's a lot of sort of new science now around using it as a longevity aid for general health and well-being, and there's some reasonably robust science around that. For our athletes, as part of our recovery strategy that I mentioned earlier, very important. And for dampening inflammation. But you can't use that in isolation. You need to use it across with a whole host of things. Like, there's no use having an ice bath and going out and eating a whole heap of inflammatory foods, like, you know, sugars and processed foods. And so you've got to do it as part of an entire package. And if you look at our recovery stack, there's probably about 8 or 10 things in there that start with hydration, nutrition, massage, ice baths, compression pumps, game readies, then the manual massage, swimming pool activities. You know, there's a host of things now so it is a important part of it. It is towards the top of importance for us. If there was 3 or 4 that I would want them to prioritise, ideally after a match that would be one of them. Yes, so we do place a lot of importance on our ice baths for our players. I think
it's a very important thing for people watching, because it's being sold so heavily that it can't be in isolation. Yeah. I think that's a very key point that you've said. What's the biggest myth being sold in the fitness industry today?
That you have to run to be fit. I think walking is fantastic, and I think a lot of people are put off fitness because they think the only way to get fit is to run. But actually, the numbers tell us, and enough research to say that walking and brisk walking is as good as running. So if you were to give, out of a scale of 10, I'd give walking a 9 out of 10, and I'd probably give running about a 7 out of 10.
Wow.
Yeah, okay. Because it's so accessible to everybody, and everybody should be doing it. and there is enough research to say that 30 minutes of brisk walking a day significantly lowers a number of particularly cardiovascular risk factors that we have. So I think for me, if you're going to embrace anything, then walking would be the one, and don't feel that you have to run to get fit.
Okay.
But then the other one is thinking that you can outrun a bad diet. I remember Asim Malhotra, the cardiologist in the UK, he said that once and I loved it. And he said, you can't outrun a bad diet. So don't think you can eat badly and then go and run it off. That's not how the body works. So remember that one as well.
That's not good to hear. Fine.
Sorry.
Warm up or cool down? Which is more important?
Both. Yeah.
Vegetarian or non-vegetarian? Any view?
I think in India we are so good at managing our vegetarian diets that you can get away being a vegetarian in any sport. And I think also now we have some really safe supplementation for those that need it available. So and it is a myth that the non-veggers better performing athletes, and a well-managed vegetarian diet, an athlete, high elite level athlete can tolerate. It is when we start having the conversation around vegan diets that I may argue differently.
Okay.
But I think because we have such good vegetarian varieties in India, and particularly on the protein front, that we can, with sufficient safe supplementation, manage our vegetarian athletes really well.
Okay. And one final question, because most of the people that will be watching this are not elite athletes. One piece of advice you'd give the average sports playing person?
Don't stop moving.
Movement.
Just keep moving. I don't think we move enough. Particularly when I speak to kids, is start moving early, and for parents to encourage kids to start moving as early as possible and then take that habit through life. So more movement, more water, eat real food. And by real food, I mean something that you either dig out of the ground, you pluck off a tree, or you fish, and doesn't come out of a packet, basically. And the other piece of advice I'd give is go back and talk to your grandparents, if you're lucky enough to have them still alive, and ask them what they used to eat, and ask them from their region, so region specific, and also ask them what they used to cook in, what mediums they used to cook in. Because I think that's where we've gone horribly wrong.
Okay.
Is the types of oils that we use today highly inflammatory. So yeah, having a good conversation with your grandparents around their food habits, start moving, drink lots of water, and I think you'll be well on your way to being an athlete of any sort.
I'm going to get started this evening. Thanks a lot, John.
Superb.
Thank you so much for your time. I think all of us learned a lot from this conversation.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
You.